Welcome to Her Own Boss, the podcast and community designed to help you find your inner entrepreneur. Her Own Boss is created by Anissa, Megan, Sarah, Lucy, Nikki, and me, Ben, as we start our careers and learn from the inspiring women who can help us along the way.
Hey everyone, this is your host Nikki, and today I am joined by Yasmin Sheikh, TEDx speaker, diversity and inclusion trainer, and the founder of Diverse Matters. Yasmin shares with us how she got her start as a lawyer in the city before founding a consulting and training company on a mission to make the workplace more accessible and inclusive. We also touch on the all-important topic of microaggressions and how even the most well-intended comments can knock someone else's confidence. Yasmin shares so many great tips for all entrepreneurs looking to make their products, services, and workplaces more inclusive. Hope you enjoy!
This episode is sponsored both by Rise, created by Barclays, and Barclays Eagle Labs. Rise and Eagle Labs are on a mission to support female founders shape the future of entrepreneurship by providing access to networks, mentorship, and trading. Search Rise, created by Barclays, or Barclays Eagle Labs to find out more.
Hi Yasmin.
Hello, Nikki.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Nice to be here.
Good. Are you ready for your quick fire questions?
Yep, go for it.
All right. So if you had your own late night talk show, who would you invite as your first guest?
Gosh, that's a good one. I think my instinct is saying Michelle Obama because I admire her really. Yeah, admire her a great deal. And I think she's someone that I think you could have a laugh with as well and talk about anything and everything, serious subjects and silly subjects. And yeah, I mean, it'd be super intimidating because of her great stature, but I think she'd be a great guest to have on. Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. The next one is, what's your go-to karaoke song?
Oh God, I haven't done karaoke for years. Oh, I do remember the last time. Oh gosh, this was years ago, but Common People by Pulp. You might be too young to remember. But that's always a good one to belt out. Yeah, I'd say that.
Love it. And then the last one is, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you like to live?
Somewhere where there's sunshine, because during this lockdown, I'm finding lockdown 3 harder than lockdown 1, because obviously we could be outside more. At this point in time, it'd be lovely to be somewhere where there's warmth and perhaps the sea as well, because I always find that very relaxing to be near water.
Agreed. I love being by the water as well. And I think I definitely took the good weather for granted in lockdown 1.
Definitely.
All right, fantastic. I'm so excited to have you on today. And I think I'd like to start by kind of going back to the start of your career. So obviously now you're kind of founder of this incredible business, but before that you were a lawyer. Could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to study law and then also start your career as a lawyer?
Sure. I mean, thinking about this, my dad was a huge influence on me because he was a lawyer. So I was very privileged and in a good position to learn from him because he would talk about his cases and I found it really interesting. And then I was very fortunate. And I know not everybody has this advantage, but I did a lot of work experience in barristers' chambers and solicitors' firms because of his connections. So that gave me a leg up, definitely. And I just loved the law because it was about problem solving. It was about people, communication skills, and breaking things down to people to make it easier to understand. That's a job of a lawyer as well, so that people can understand it in simple layman terms. And it just appealed to me. And my dad was a huge influence because I could see what he was doing, and he really enjoyed his work as well. So yeah, that led me to study law at university and then eventually get a training contract.
I guess then an interesting question would be, how did you decide what aspect of law that you wanted to go into? Did you follow something similar to what your dad was doing, or did you kind of take a different path?
He was an insolvency practitioner, and he was a commercial lawyer as well. But what I wanted to do was litigation primarily. So I liked the idea of going to court, doing some advocacy. First of all, I wanted to do clinical negligence, but didn't end up doing that, fell into personal injury. I did that for about 10 odd years, yeah.
Sounds really fascinating. I have to be honest, my kind of impression in my head of lawyers comes from TV shows like Suits, where it's all really
Oh,
dramatic. I just have to confess that.
well, obviously I'm Meghan Markle, not. Yeah,
Obviously.
it's nothing like Suits. I wish it was as glamorous because yeah, it isn't like that. And Ally McBeal is the show I used to watch when I was growing up. Nothing like that at all. It's less glamorous and not as exciting, shall we say? But it's a really good profession to get into, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. I think what I really like about your kind of personal story as well is how much it was influenced by your dad. And I think having role models like that you can look up to is so important, and kind of what we try and do through the podcast as well.
Yeah.
I suppose, did you ever consider anything other than law when you were growing up? You know, you're an entrepreneur now. Do you feel like you've always had that entrepreneurial spirit, or is this kind of a more recent realization about yourself?
Well, your first question, did I always consider law? I do remember. Now, my dad's Asian. Now, this is important because there were only three professions available to me at that point. It was
Yeah.
either become a lawyer or a doctor or possibly an accountant. My brother is an accountant, I'm a lawyer, so we fit the stereotype. I do remember I did say to my dad one day I wanted to do media studies. Didn't go down well at all. He just didn't understand why I would want to do that. Um,
Yeah.
but actually, it sounds terrible. I wasn't forced into doing law. I actually really, it appealed to me, but I was considering other things as well. But in terms of being an entrepreneur, it's funny even using that word because I guess I am an entrepreneur, but I didn't always set out to be one. I'm a wheelchair user, so I'm a disabled person, and a lot of disabled people do end up being entrepreneurs, mainly because workplaces, unfortunately, do not cater for people with disabilities who may need to work in a more flexible, in a different way, perhaps different hours or being at home more, unconventional, non-traditional ways of working. And being an entrepreneur suits a lot of disabled people because we don't always fit into the mold, the standard 9 to 5. I mean, now it's different
Yeah.
because of coronavirus. Most of us are working from home. So actually that's benefited a lot of disabled people. But I kind of had to become an entrepreneur really in the early days because I had both good and bad experiences in the law firm that I was working at. I had a bad boss who basically said if I employed everyone with your disability, the business would collapse. And he said he had the same problem with part-time women workers. Yeah, he didn't really get diversity and all the good things that come from it. So that knocked my confidence a lot. But I felt that the pull towards entrepreneurship was really strong because I needed to carve out something for myself because I just felt I didn't really fit in to an organization. And I felt there was something more that I could do. Also, I don't know if you know, you probably know part of my story, but for the benefit of your listeners, I sustained my
Yeah.
injury back on the 18th of March 2008 when I had a spinal stroke. I was 29 at the time, went to bed, fit, healthy. I, would go to the gym typically 4 or 5 times a week, never smoked in my life, vegetarian, never been ill in my life, and went to bed one day. And within a couple of hours, I couldn't move my legs at all. The neurologist said that I had had a spinal stroke and I'd need to basically use a wheelchair for the rest of my life. So huge, huge shock. And I had to take a year off work for rehabilitation and adjusting to what had happened, basically. And so, yes, it was a big shock to me. And going back to work, when a significant life event happens like that, you do reassess what it is you want to do in life. And I just found that there were different things that were pulling me towards setting up my own business, things that I was passionate about, interested in. And that's really, it was a kind of moving away from a pain, i.e. a boss who didn't really, I felt, appreciate me, see my value, but also a greater pull towards starting something myself, seeing a gap in the market, trying to make things better in the world, I guess, and doing something that fulfilled me as well, and where I thought I brought value. So a little bit of both, a pulling away from and a pulling towards.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really interesting what you said there about how entrepreneurship suits a lot of disabled people. And I think it's interesting because we've heard a similar thing in the podcast previously, but in the context of it suits a lot of women who
Yes.
have that similar pull to just do something better, and rather than trying to fit into a workplace
Yeah.
that doesn't suit them and isn't serving them, create their own workplaces. So yeah, I think that comparison there is
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, because I felt like I was a square peg in a round hole. So,
Mm,
we asked for reasonable adjustments, the flexibility, working differently. Because of my disability, I couldn't travel on most of the underground and the train, which is how I got
yeah,
into work. So I had to come into work later by taxi. And so already you feel like you're on the back foot because you're almost having to compromise who you are. And that's how I felt anyway at the
yeah.
beginning. And I kind of had to adapt to their way of working, not my way of working. Whereas now I can do as I please because I set my own rules. So that does suit a lot of disabled people, unless the environment is such where you are able to work in that way. And some employers obviously offer that. But for me at the time, it just felt that I was compromising too much of myself.
Yeah, and I think that point there at the end leads well onto your business currently, Diverse Matters, and kind of your mission to make more workplaces like that, so that less people feel
Yeah.
like they need to create their own environments. The environments are there to suit them. So could you tell us a little bit about Diverse Matters? And I would be interested to know as well what experiences or how long it took you to realize that you needed to go out there and start this business between kind of going back to work after your injury.
Yeah. So Diverse Matters essentially is a consultancy training, and we offer workplaces the ability to build inclusive organisations. So whether it be for women, LGBT plus, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, but primarily we specialise in disability inclusion in the workplace. So that people are retaining and recruiting the best disabled talent, and the ability to bring out the best in people as well. And also it has that knock-on effect of improving the confidence of disabled people already working in the workplace, so that they understand their value and what they can bring, and to really allow them to be authentic. So it's the opposite of my experience in a way, is that I want other people not to feel like I felt. That's really the mission statement of Diverse Matters. And yeah, it took me probably 6 years. So I went back to work after my
Wow.
injury. And I guess I had to build up my confidence and really learn how to be in this new body of mine, because it was all new to me. I always say I was the first disabled person I met. And I sort of did it in a safe way. I started, I had a good boss as well as a bad boss, as well as a bad boss. And he was the
Yeah.
global HR director, and he saw my talents and skills and my passion and my interests in diversity and disability inclusion. So I started blogging about unconscious bias. He asked me to set up a disability network. And from there, because he saw that I had a skill in this, he encouraged that and really gave me a lot of confidence and improved my self-esteem. So I ended up speaking at conferences for Business Disability Forum, did mini workshops, did it very gradually. And I noticed there was a gap, there was a need to, because everybody was talking about LGBT, Black, Asian, minority, women, equality, but nobody, well, people were talking about disability, but it was a space where people there was a lot of work to do. And so I decided to take the leap. So it probably took 6 years from my injury to actually starting the business. So it took a while, but I had to really get my confidence back and do things in a safe and gradual way.
Yeah, completely. I mean, confidence is key, and we talk about it a lot on the podcast. But I want to touch on what you said towards the start of that answer about how you were the first disabled person that you knew. and how that's kind of reflected in how we treat disability when we talk about diversity. Because I think even, preparing for this episode, I realized in this podcast, we obviously talk a lot about women. That's our
Yeah.
number one theme. We've touched on race before, but I mean, we rarely touch on intersectionalities. And then additionally, we rarely touch on disabilities. And I think it's interesting when you're kind of talking about your experiences and how, I mean, I'm kind of cheating here. I've heard your previous podcast interviews and your talks about some of the microaggressions you experienced and this kind of idea of misguided paternalism where people didn't know any other disabled people, didn't know how to kind of work around it. And I think that is how a lot of microaggressions start, is this, when you come across someone that's different to you, you don't know how to react, and you kind of by default treat that in the wrong way. I don't know if based on your experiences or from the work you do, you have any kind of comments around that or anything to share with us.
I've got a lot to say about that. Microaggression.
Here we go.
Yeah. Oh, this is like therapy. It's great. Microaggressions, for those who may not be familiar with the term, it's an instance of subtle, indirect discrimination against a marginalized group. So whether it be race, gender, sexuality, disability. An example being, I experience microaggressions on a daily basis, and a lot of people who are different, I guess, do as well, whether you have particularly if you have a visible difference. So I know a lot of Black, Asian, minority people experience similar things. So for a Black person, it may be, but where are you really from? It's this, it kind of plays into long-standing stereotypes and makes people feel othered and different. And the subtext is, you don't really belong here. If you're a white person, you probably wouldn't ask that first off. If you've got to know them a bit better, you might go into, where they were brought up and maybe their family, all of that. But it usually is an assumption that people make. And the term microaggression, again, sometimes it's not always helpful, because in terms of disability, for example, people say, do you need help, on a daily basis? And the term microaggression, it seems like I've got the problem if I'm saying that's a microaggression, because in of itself, that's fairly innocuous. And actually people are mostly being kind. And it may be that I look like I'm struggling if I'm going up a hill. And in of itself, it's not really a big deal. But when I'm used to being independent, it sometimes depends on the mood that I'm in. If people ask me when it's obvious, like I'm just going through a shop to get something, and it's easy for me, but I guess it's an instant reaction that people just think someone in a wheelchair, they need help. And it's so hard to explain to people, because they think, well, what am I supposed to do? I think my advice to the person seeing a disabled person is just wait. Don't just make a massive assumption and jump right in. Just wait. If that person looks like they're struggling, then casually say, yeah, okay, you need a hand. That's fine. I'm not saying don't ever ask anybody again, because I wouldn't want to be in a world like that. But just wait a minute. Maybe give them a chance. If I drop something, I'm actually nearer the floor than most people walking, so I can actually pick it up really easily. So just give them a second, give them a chance, and just use your common sense. Obviously, if someone's struggling with something, then you would help them anyway, whether they're in a wheelchair or don't have a disability, a visible one. But yeah, it can really impact your confidence and mental health if you have to constantly say something. And I don't always. I kind of let things go. I mean, there are many examples of microaggressions. Some people say one person said to me, oh, you're quite pretty for someone in a wheelchair. Again, that's seen as a compliment, but the subtext is normally disabled people aren't attractive, so you're the exception. Now, what does that say? It really is very telling about somebody's attitude. And it's really hard to know how to respond to something like that, because if someone says that in the first place, they clearly don't understand what they've said. So over time, it has a cumulative effect. It's exhausting, it's tiring, it's annoying when you just want to go out, be anonymous and get on with your day. And and I'm only a human being. And, sometimes I can react in a way that I don't like, and you reflect upon it and you think about it, you think, oh, I could have handled that better. It's so difficult. But it does build up over time, and you just want a day off sometimes. That's the thing. That's a very
Yeah,
long answer.
absolutely. No, it's a very good answer as well, and really kind of interesting to hear your experiences. So we've done a mini-sode on microaggressions with Hannah Awanuga, who also works in the kind of diversity and inclusion space. And it's fascinating when you start having these conversations, because I think anyone who comes from any sort of minority, and minority
Yeah.
in quotation marks,
Yeah.
background will have an experience, whether it's from their, perspective as, a woman or another marginalized gender or their ethnicity, or anything like that. And I guess kind of touching on all of those different identities and intersectionality, how do you kind of bring that up when, for example, you're doing work through diverse matters? Because I think when you talk about microaggressions or discrimination in one context, it's kind of easy for people to really grasp that. How do you bring up this context of intersectionality and how people will have multiple different identities that may mean they're being discriminated against, rather than just the one that you can see or the one you think is kind of most prevalent?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is if I go into a room, I'm typically the only visibly disabled person. Even though I'm a woman and I've got a disability, my gender is almost irrelevant now. And also I'm mixed race. I mean, I tick a lot of boxes. But the disability is the main feature where people react very differently to when I was walking. How do I deal with it in diverse matters in my training? When I give examples, firstly, I have to define what is a microaggression. And also I have to stress to the person, your interaction with me may be a one-off, but I experienced this multiple times. I try and get them to be in my shoes. And I try to get them to explain what you could do differently, because a lot of the time, particularly with disabilities, people are very, very well intentioned. They either want to help, or they make you more comfortable, or there's an awkwardness there. It's not meant with malice. I get that. But it's not always about intention. It's about impact. It's about impact. And if people are really interested in making people comfortable, they should listen to the other person that's experiencing this, because people tend to get very defensive. And, I get people pushing me without asking. That's not just a microaggression. That's practically an assault. They just start pushing, and it's very dangerous because I could fall out of my chair. And it's not respecting me as a person. I'm just seen as a wheelchair that needs, moving. Well, ask the person. There's nothing wrong with asking the person and having a conversation, a respectful dialogue. So defining the term, what is a microaggression, that helps people, giving it lots of examples, explaining to them the impact on my daily life, how that I experience this, what they can do differently, because we can't always criticize people and say, don't do that, don't. We'll give them the tools so that they know what to do differently and how that will help people. So what's helped me, for example, I remember a lady said to me, oh, do you work? And I typically get that now. I'm in a wheelchair. Whereas before, when I was walking, and I've mentioned this in my TED Talk, if anyone wants to check out my TED Talk, bit of a plug there.
Definitely recommend
yeah,
it. It's really good.
Thank you. Before, when I was walking, it would be, what do you do? Again, the assumption being that, of course, you have a job. But now I'm in a wheelchair. It's, do you work? So what I did, rather than being aggressive or defensive, I just said to her, that's really interesting. Because before, when I was not in a wheelchair, people would say, what do you do? So I'm not, I wasn't attacking her. I was just making an observation. She got it immediately. Said, gosh, yes, I've just made that assumption. I didn't need to actually say that to her, but through me kind of gently challenging her, she got it. So I've done that a few times. I mean, I'm still learning, Nikki. Again, it's something I have to perfect, because I don't always get it right. And I sometimes it just depends on the mood that I'm in. But I like to get people to think a little bit before they say something, and I can usually tell if people have got a friend or somebody they know who's in a wheelchair, because some people just know how to be. just act normally, really. Nobody wants to feel different or othered. We just, just say hello. You don't really need to comment on the chair. If it needs to come up, I will bring it up. And I usually guide people as to how to make the experience more comfortable. And we're very good at that, disabled people. We're good at making people comfortable because we can sense the discomfort immediately. Because you can see in people's heads, what do I do? Do I push her? Do I offer to help? We can see it instinctively.
Yeah. So in the conversation I had with Hannah in our minisode about microaggressions, we talked a lot about what bystanders can do. And I think from what you're describing there, it sounds like there's probably more that kind of bystanders and allies can be doing to help in these situations, because it's great that you have the confidence to, explain to people your situation and everything, but I think it's also true that it shouldn't always have to be the person on the receiving end of the microaggression who says something. And also when you hear someone else, maybe use a slur against disabled people or make a comment when there's not a disabled person present, I think the same is true, that someone needs to speak up, even if you're not in that situation yourself.
I agree. And also I appreciate not all disabled people have the confidence to speak up. I've been through a journey. I'm 12, 13 years down the line. If I was newly injured, I was a different person then. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the network that I have. A good tip for people who are experienced microaggressions is find your network. I have a very good friend called Merrin. Say a little hello to Merrin. I'll get her to listen to the podcast. But she is my go-to person. She's also in a wheelchair. And we check with each other, say, am I going mad? But can I just check? Did I react in a way that you would react? How would you deal with this? Just talking about it. Find those people, find your tribe is so important, because you need other people who can really empathize and experience these things. And sometimes we have a laugh about it, because you've got to laugh sometimes at people's reactions. And that really helps. It's a very cathartic experience. So it's really important not to experience these things on your own, because there are other people who do experience it as well. And that's helps you from feeling isolated and othered and so different.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've already kind of touched on a lot of the kind of tips that I wanted to get through, but I also wanted to ask, so the people who listen to this podcast tend to be younger women at the start of their careers. And I would love to hear from your sort of expertise and your experience, how, as young people starting our careers, kind of going into organizations, we can help be those allies to make our workplaces more inclusive of disabled people. And then I have a similar question as well for young women who want to be entrepreneurs, and they kind of have that more hands-on role in creating the workplace and how to make it more inclusive.
So for people who want to be entrepreneurs and make their workplaces inclusive is speak, if we're talking about disability, for example, is find people who with different disabilities and talk to them. It's as simple as that. It's, is your website accessible for people perhaps with a hearing impairment? Do you have subtitles for your videos? Is find people and speak to them. Test things out. So if you've got products or services, test it out. Find like a group of people and with a range of disabilities, and ask them. It's like a focus group, I guess, and get their feedback and take on the feedback. Getting having good products and services means going out to market and speaking to people who are directly going to be affected by this. And are you missing out on a massive market if you're not talking and connecting to those people who are going to use your product? So that's how you can make it inclusive, is actually get the feedback, take it on, learn from it, and improve your product and service. And if you're in a work environment, say you're an employer and you want to make workplaces inclusive, is really going, maybe we reach out to traditional places, which excludes kind of different people. Maybe we're recruiting the same kind of people, is maybe going out to different places, looking deeper and further, and finding people who are a bit different, diverse, if you like, and talking to them as to, what would make it more comfortable for you in this environment. But I think because we're working from home predominantly, I think we are attracting more diverse candidates. I know I spoke to somebody, I think from BT, and he said he'd attracted a lot of candidates who were not their typical, because now we can work much more flexibly. As you said at the start, Nikki, you know, women who probably need to work a different way because predominantly they are doing the caring responsibilities, perhaps children or elderly parents. Maybe they need flexibility. And I think this has been an advantage in some ways, as horrible as the coronavirus has been, but it has given us more flexibility that actually is helping diverse candidates to have the confidence to apply to places, because they can work on their own terms now, much more than being in an office.
Yeah, agreed. I love your point about, for entrepreneurs, it's not all about the workplace, but it's about your product and your service as well, and making sure you're testing with, you know, as many people as possible. And I'll plug Diverse Matters here as well if you need some consultancy. I hear they do some great work.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So we're drawing towards the end of the episode now, and we always ask our guests a question about confidence. And I think this is going to be particularly interesting given the bits of confidence you've already touched on in your journey. But what is it that gives you confidence? Where does your confidence come from?
You know, when you asked me this question, you sent this question to me before, and I had to think about it. And it's the ability to be myself. And that fits in with everything that I stand for and everything I've experienced. You know, in my workplace, I didn't feel I could be myself. You know, I always say, we've got this expression, bringing your whole self to work in an organization. There, in my old firm, some of the time I couldn't do that because my disability, I almost felt a sense of shame about who I was, because I had to fit in and compromise who I was. But the ability to be myself and not to be inauthentic, and whether it be people accepting me for my disability and what that means, you know, if in a context with friends, for example, if they say, well, now we're not going anywhere, but in the past, you know, let's go to this bar, they will automatically check out whether it's accessible or not. You know, it's not an issue. People who know me well know that it has to be accessible. The ability to just be without thinking, oh, do I have to act in a certain way? So quite simply, just to be myself, all that encompasses my disability, my personality, my character, so that I can just be comfortable.
That's a great answer. I love that. Thank you so much for coming on today and for kind of sharing all of your experiences and expertise. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Nikki. Great to be connected with you as well.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can find out more about Her Own Boss at herownboss.co.uk or by searching for us on LinkedIn and Instagram.